Welcome to QDL. QDL is your look at who and what is making news in the world of quality. I'm Dirk Ducharme, Editor-in-Chief of Quality Digest. Right now, President Biden's federal vaccine mandate is on hold. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans ordered the administration to refrain from enforcing the requirements until further notice. Several lawsuits filed mostly by Republican states, businesses, religious organizations look to overturn the requirements. So who knows how this is going to shake out, but it actually doesn't seem likely that it's going to make it, but we'll see. However, CEOs are still facing many questions from their employees when it comes to their rights and safety. So what is the best stance? Federally mandated vaccinations or not, what should companies be doing, if anything, to protect both the workers and workers' rights in this context? Joining us today is James Bailey, Hochberg Professor of Leadership, George Washington University. James was named one of the world's top 10 executive educators by the International Council for Executive Leadership Development. He has published more than 50 academic papers and case studies and is the author of 5 books, including the award-winning, best-selling Organizational and Managerial Wisdom, and he has a book coming up, Lessons on Leadership. James, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so whether the mandate goes into effect or not, how does a company who wants to enforce their own mandate deal with someone who just says, nah, I don't think so, I'm not going to do it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Of course, there's been industries all during the pandemic. There were people who have had to go back to work, and most off the healthcare industry, right? That's what we think about. They didn't have any choice but to go back to work. And I'd also say that this isn't new. I mean, we've been working for a long time for people to work at least part-time at home. Now, to get to your question, when somebody just says, nah, I'm not going to do it, well, we've got a couple cases of some people trying to do that and ended up coming back to work anyway, and that's particularly within the banking industry, with JP Diamond at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. They just said, come back or you're gone, and pretty much everybody showed up. And so far the hard-boiled stance hasn't worked so far. I don't think it's going to continue to work when we start getting outside of the banking industry, which tends to be pretty authoritative and authoritarian as well.
Right.
But certainly that approach has worked so far.
So let's assume that there's not going to be a legal federal mandate in place, or maybe even state mandates, who knows. But even if there is no mandate in place, does a company still have an ethical or a moral mandate that they should strongly encourage? And if they're going to do that, other than do it our way or we're going to fire you, that you can do that, but that seems like the harsh way to do it. Is there a better way to go about this?
Yeah, I mean, there really is. And it's something we've been talking about, reading about, writing about in my field in organizational change and in leadership for a long time is, look, people resist change. And this is very, very deep in the human condition, in the psyche, in our collective unconscious, and maybe even in our gene code. And so, and people usually resist change because they're frightened about something. They feel like they're losing something. They feel like they're giving up a gain of some sort, or that they're somehow in jeopardy. And so you're going to have really kind of 5 different sort of people that as they return to the office, or as they case may be, as they don't. You're going to have active resistors, people who say, no, I do not want to do that, and are going to fight against it. You're going to have passive resistors, people who don't want to do it, but they're passively expressing their resistance. Folks just in the middle, passive supporters and active supporters. So you're going to have 5 groups there. Okay? And that means that you've got to manage and lead those different groups differently. Okay? So let's take that active resistor. They do not want to go back. But one of the things you have to make sure is that they have their voice. If you try to silence them, okay, everybody's going to see that as a heavy-handed technique. They deserve their time on the soapbox, just as that active supporter deserves theirs. The ultimate thing to do is to try to you used, I think you said like a moral case, didn't you say, like a moral or ethical?
Ethical, yeah.
Yeah, bring people back to work. And that is there. Now it's a matter of expressing it. And how do you express it? Well, Be with your colleagues. What about the camaraderie? What about the esprit de corps? What about the sense of community? What about the sense of citizenship? What about all the things that made us a unique organization? What about the connections that you got from other people? When Dirk, you said something, and you and I were chatting, you said something that connected with something that I was thinking about, and something unique happened. A new idea was born, if you will. That doesn't happen via Zoom. In other words, it's a positive sum game for people to return to the audience, to be with their colleagues, to participate in a community larger than themselves, and also performance is going to be part of that. You're going to perform better when you're with these like-minded people than when you are in your dungeon of a basement, thinking about the light bulb upstairs that needs to be changed, right? You're more focused. There's no evidence, by the way, zilch evidence that you're as productive working as at home as you were working at the office. So I think there is a moral suasion here and a leadership that has to take place to draw people back to the workplace.
So, I mean, you said something at the very top of that. And I think what you were saying was talking, communicating, having a conversation, rather than just from the top, here's the rule, everybody's got to be vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, you're fired, without any kind of conversation for those who don't want to do that. So are you saying that even those who are saying, no, I'm absolutely not going to do it, you bring them into the office and you sit down and you say, you have a discussion. Why do you feel this way? Here's where I'm coming from. Where are you coming from? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I try to stay away from the vaccination stuff and focus a little bit more on returning to the office, because we've got 50% of Americans said that they will quit their job before they will return to the office.
Okay.
And so the vaccination's a little bit harder, and that has, a very much of a public health element and angle to it, which I don't really feel qualified to comment on. But I think the point, if we were to treat this as returning to the office, and I guess this is apropos for having the vaccine or not, is why is it good for you to come back to the office? Why do you want to do it? See, people don't always know why they want or don't want to do something. And usually if they are resisting something, it's rooted in fear. So what are you afraid of? Okay, well, the person who's been working at home is afraid that they're going to lose the discretion that they've been able to develop the last 18 or 20 months. Fair enough. Okay, we get that. You're not going to come back to a hierarchical organization that's going to bully you with a manager looking over your shoulder, dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. But rather, you're going to be able to spend at least 1 day, 2 days at home. We're going to structure your position so that you're more responsible for the reporting and the filing and the oversight of your individual assignments, obligations, key performance indicators, or deliverables. So we're going to do things that make this so it's not so much of a loss, so that you want to return here. And we're going to remind you about your comrades. We're going to remind you about your fellow workers that are here for you and that will carry you when you're having a bad day or even a bad week. And so it's appealing to their better instincts and addressing the things that they're afraid of. So yeah, it's talking. Some of that is speech giving. Some of that is just good CEO stuff and good C-suite stuff. Just being able to articulate this in the right way. When you get down into the muscle of the organizations, that's going to be you and me. That's going to be you telling me why I, James Bailey, want to come back here. Just in the same way that you might tell me, I want to start my own podcast. Okay, whatever it is. It's persuasion. It's moral suasion, it's information, it's logic, it's all of those sort of things. So in the final analysis, it is going to be about communication.
Okay. Which probably is going to tie over to this next question here. I know you've done some studies on hypersensitivity in the workplace, and boy, have we really felt that over the last few years. I mean, people are it's almost like they're waiting for something to set them off. It's almost like they're daring somebody to cross the line, right? And it's like you almost can't talk about anything in the workplace. Right. What have you found about this?
Well, it was sort of funny when I decided to do this. I was absolutely sure somebody else would have done this. that were just more sensitive in the middle of COVID. I mean, right, this just makes perfect sense. I mean, people are looking around at a one-in-a-lifetime pandemic. They don't know early on, especially. There's a lot of incomplete information, but whether you can get it by touching a surface or by being a block away from someone, right? So obviously, people are nervous. Their kids aren't going to school. They're trying to do work on Zoom, and most of us were very new to Zoom or various other platforms at that given time. So there's just a lot of anxiety in the air. And usually when people are anxious, they tend to be a little irritable too, because anxiety wears on you, right? It releases certain kind of chemicals, neurochemicals that just at first they ramp you up and then it make you really tired. And that combination usually leads to irritability. And then third, they were just uncertain. What's going to happen? What's going to happen with my work? What's going to happen about when the kids can go back to school? Can they go back to school? When am I going to go back to work? Am I going to be able to fly to see my grandmother who's ill? So I was sure somebody had done this because it was all right. It's just so obvious, and nobody had done the research. And so we simply dug in and got a whole bunch of people to respond, asking them these simple questions. Are people more irritable now than they were before COVID? The answer was overwhelmingly yes. Were people more anxious than they were before COVID? Overwhelmingly yes. Were people more uncertain before COVID? Absolutely yes, was the answer to that. So in a way, I kind of feel like it just validated common sense, but nobody had ever made the case or illustrated the data.
Okay. Well, that makes me wonder about a few things here then. So when I first read hypersensitivity, I kind of, in my mind, I looked at it a slightly different way, where in the workplace, there's a lot of workplace issues going on right now, just culturally, right? There's obviously political issues over the last 5-6 years. There's religious issues. There's social injustice issues, and so on and so forth, right? And they make their way into the workplace, and people kind of irritably, talking about what you're talking about, just react to almost anything that's said.
Yeah.
What should a company, given that, should a company itself take a stand on particular issues, whatever the CEO happens to have feelings, about transgender rights or Black Lives Matter or, vaccine mandates or whatever? Should the company take a stand on these things? And if it does, how does it fairly communicate that stance and why it's taking it to its employees?
That's a great question. First off, I think you're right that hypersensitivity, you could argue, was not simply about the pandemic, right? This had been running for a long, long time, that a lot of issues have been being stretched thin, and you weren't certain what right was, what wrong was, what value to use, what was the proper compass, and that had been going for a while. So the pandemic really just kind of added on to the psychic trauma we might have been experiencing for a good 4 or 5 years. But I don't know whether you can
Sorry, excuse me.
Or anything. About 2 years ago, I published a piece in Harvard Business Review called How Consumers React When Companies Get Political. And this goes, I think, directly to your point about whether a company embraces transgender issues, whether they are abortion rights issues, whatever they happen to do. How do we respond to them? And does a company have a moral obligation to step up and accept these issues? And so we did, I won't explain the study. It's a pre-test, post-study design that used 2 different conditions. But basically what we found is if you're conservative in your orientation and the company that you're looking at is engaging in conservative activity, yay, right? They're behaving in a way that's consistent with you. So let's say that you're conservative and believe in gun rights. If a company that you're thinking about shopping at is also pro gun ownership, well, you'd like that. But if the company you're dealing with is pro-choice, which maybe isn't inconsistent with your conservative values, you don't care. You continue to shop there if you like product. And this is true for people who identify as liberals. liberals, and again, liberal on a spectrum. We try to use liberal and conservative as opposed to Republican and Democrat.
Right. Yeah.
Terms are, they've gotten a little, I don't know what it means to be a Republican anymore. I do know what liberal and a conservative mean now. Is liberal folks were perfectly happy when their organization that they were inspecting, looking at, was engaging in liberal causes. When they were engaging in conservative causes, liberals were a little bit more concerned than conservatives were when the companies were engaging in liberal policies.
Okay.
But then what all came down to is people really didn't care. When it came down to it, if they were getting a good product, guess what? They're still going to Chick-fil-A for that sandwich. Even though they don't like the political causes that Chick-fil-A might be involved in. They don't like that they close on Sunday. They don't like all these other things about it. Tell you, I'm at GW. This is one of the most sort of politically liberal campuses in the country. Hey, we've gotten one of our food courts, Chick-fil-A. There's 40 kids outside that door all the time. And right next to it is a little local taco place. And there's a little local poke place. All local healthy food sort of places, and there's 40 kids waiting for that Chick-fil-A sandwich. And so at the end of the day, people really care. I'd add one other thing to that. I don't know whether you want to go anywhere with this, is that I think a lot of times when companies engage in political advocacy, it's actually advertising. They know by product.
Yeah.
And by standing up for trans rights, whatever it happens to be, they know their clientele is already in favor of this. So now they can not only look brave because they're willing to stand up, but they're also just cementing the loyalty from their existing clientele.
And it sounds like you're saying there's from your study there's no downside. In other words, I as a company I can take a stand for whatever, and people may outside, may complain and throw, stones at me, but they still buy my products. And as a company, that's really all I care about.
That is all. You are spot on. I mean, let's look what happened after the Georgia election laws following the 2020 election, where Georgia rewrote some of those laws in a way that many believe were going to prevent minority communities from being able to vote. In other words, they were going to restrict access to voting. Yeah. Look at the huge reaction to that. Major League Baseball takes the All-Star game out to Denver. Coca-Cola comes out and makes statements about how they might even move their corporate headquarters. Can you imagine Coca-Cola outside of Atlanta may move their corporate headquarters because of this? Delta, Atlanta-based, also comes out and says these things. Now, do you think they really meant any of this?
Right.
My guess is, to your point, was they put together some focus groups. They knew that people who even supported these fairly draconian Georgia laws were still going to buy Coke, especially if it was on sale at Walmart or at Sam's Club. They were going to get that. They were going to get that anyway. So in a way, they were just getting out. They were telling us all how concerned they are about the world, and they weren't in the least bit interested in lack of sales.
Interesting.
I know it's a little jaded too.
Well, it is jaded, and I think it also runs the gamut. I mean, I think to be fair, there probably are CEOs who do actually believe in what the stance that they're taking.
Yes.
But whether they do or not, kind of in the long run, what you're saying is that it doesn't, in terms of the company's bottom line, it's safe to come out and say, which I think should give some CEOs some comfort. It's like, I really got to stand up and say this is what I believe in, and know they can do it and get their point out there, and really probably not worry about having any kind of negative impact on the bottom line, which might make some people comfortable.
retail businesses, food-based businesses, things like that. I think you'll continue to see it there. Nike, whatever it happens
Sure,
to be,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Product-based businesses, yeah.
Okay. James Bailey, Hochberg Professor of Leadership at George Washington University. Thanks for joining us today. Interesting discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Dirk.
Sure. And that is it for today. If there's a topic you would like us to discuss on the show, or somebody you'd like to bring on, some product you'd like to see, just let us know. You can email us at qdl@qualitydigest.com. We'll do our best. That's it for today. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you at the next QDL. So long.